In this video, I'm going to give you a basic introduction to loops, and we're going to begin with the while loop. And our while loop looks like this when it's written. We have our code in between the curly braces. The while loop in between the brackets has a conditional expression that it checks before it runs the code. If we go ahead and take a look at it, you could see that our conditional expression contains a Boolean expression, which means it's going to either return a true or a false statement. And if we go ahead and continue, we could see that if our while loop is true, the code in between the curly brackets is going to run. Our while loop is going to start here. It's going to go through and check the conditional expression, which is the expression that's in here. The conditional expression could be anything like, is 1 greater than 2? And the answer to that is true. Yes, 1 is greater than 2. And then if it's true, the code in between these curly braces is going to run, and it's going to do the task. It's going to go back around and check the condition again. If our while loop is false, it does the same thing. It starts at the beginning. It checks for the condition here, which is this one right here. And then if it's false, it's going to end the while loop, which means it's going to move outside our while loop, which means that this code in the middle is not going to run. So what you want to have in between your curly braces is you want to have code that will run, and eventually it will return a result that makes the conditional statement in here false. So you don't want to have an infinite loop which will break your program. So right here in Visual Studio, what I have on my form is a basic button, and when I click on this button, I want to basically run my while loop. And as I have written my while loop here, you could see that immediately inside it gives me a Boolean result, and that's the conditional expression that needs to go in here. It needs to return an either true or false statement to allow the while loop to begin running. So I'm gonna do a basic example where I have my button, and inside my button I'm gonna change the text of the button so that we could see our result. And I'm gonna make a variable called count. Let me go ahead up here and make a variable called count. I'm gonna set my count to 0 and count. I'm gonna change it back to a string right here so that we could display the number that's inside count. And we want count to run 10 times. So what I will have inside here is to increase the count. So I'm going to increase count every time the loop runs. Whenever this is true, count is going to increase up until it's no longer true. So which means that count is going to start from 0, and when count is equal to 10, the whole loop is going to stop. So if I go here and press start and I press on my button, you could see that it counts from 0 up to 10. So computers are really fast. You can't see them like actually doing the counting, but what I could do here is I could slow the computer down and tell it to just count a little bit slower, and then let's refresh our form. So I'm gonna say this dot refresh. So what I'm doing is basically just telling the form to refresh and to count a little bit slower, because computers are really fast. You can't see them actually doing the counting. So this is the counting actually happening, but what I did is just slowing down the whole process. So there we go. We could have the computer count this 1,000 times, and if I reduce that number there, you could see that our loop is going to run up until it gets to 1000. but since it's running slowly, I'm gonna stop that. We're not gonna wait until it gets to 1,000. Now let's take a look at the for loop. You could see right here, this is what the basic for loop looks like. What you have here is a variable that you declare inside the for loop, and this is your conditional expression right here, and here you have your count. So instead of having your count like the while loop in here, you're going to have your count inside the expression itself. So that's like another way of doing a loop that takes the heavy lifting of you having to make your own variable, declare it at another line, and do all the stuff that we did in the while loop. That's just messy. So the for loop basically makes it easier for us to do the loop in just a few lines of code. So here you have your conditional expression. It works the same as the while loop. X is going to run 10 times, and the code that's in here is going to be executed. The nice thing about for loops is that you know how many times the loop is going to repeat by just saying right here that how many times the for loop is going to run by giving your conditional expression right here. Remember, this returns a boolean result. Don't forget that. So we have what our for loop basically looks like. When it starts, it's going to declare a variable called x right here. It's going to set it to 0, and then it's going to go ahead and check for the conditional expression is x less than 10. If that is true, it's going to do the task, which is our code right here, and it's going to increment x. It's going to do this automatically. You don't have to do it like the while loop where I went inside the loop and I said count plus plus. This does it automatically, and it goes ahead around, and it's going to go back right here and check at my conditional expression if it's still true. If x is equal to 10, which means that this is false, it's going to go ahead and end the loop. When it ends the loop, it's going to go right down here outside the loop. So again, right here in Visual Studio, I'm going to write the word for to declare my for loop. What I'm going to do now is press the tab key twice, and then it's going to give me the basic format of what the for loop looks like. We have our variable that's declared for us right here, we have our conditional statement right here, and we have our count that's this side that's going to increase the statement that's going to increase the value of our variable called I. So I'm going to do the same thing that I did for the while loop, where I have my button and I'm going to change the basic text of the button. And what I'm doing is I'm going to make the text equal to I, and then set I to a string so that we could display it on the button's text. Now if I take a look at my conditional expression, I want to do the same thing that I did with my while loop, and then right here I'm going to put 10, and what we're going to have is this statement repeating 10 times. And I'm going to press start and press my button, and as you can see right here that here it says 9 and we have it as 10 here. So you'll be asking yourself, so what's happening? So basically what's happening is that when our loop runs, it's going to run 10 times. So this statement that's in here is actually executed 10 times. The only difference is that because we are displaying I right here, and I is not increased inside our curly braces, I is increased here at the top. That is why I only is going to count up to 9, but the statement that's in here is going to run 10 times. So that's the thing that you must keep in mind. So if I stop this program, and just to show you that this runs 10 times, I'm going to make a variable called count, set it to an integer, set it to 0, and instead of displaying I, I'm going to display my variable count. And I just want to show you that this statement that's in here, whatever that you put in here, it's going to run 10 times. So I'm going to press start, and press my button, and as you can see, it's running this statement that's in here 10 times. It's just that with the for loop, when I is running, I is going to begin by setting it to 0, and it's going to put 0 into account as a loop. So that's the only difference. So the nice thing about the for loop is you know how many times it's going to repeat, unlike the while loop. So the while loop is great for instances where you don't know how many times you want your loop to repeat. So in C# we also have what's called a for each loop. A for each loop is basically a for loop that runs through an array or a list of items. This is what a for each looks like. You have your variable with the data type and the identifier, and it runs through an iterable. An iterable is basically an array or a list of items. And what's going to go through is going to go through all those items that are inside your iterable. And each of those items are going to be stored in the identifier, which is your variable. We look at a basic example right here. We have our numbers array, which has numbers up from 1 to 7, and our for each loop has a variable called item, and item is going to store each of those values that's inside numbers. It's going to go through them, so which means that our for each loop is going to run 7 times. It's going to take into account how long our numbers array is. And what I have right here is a list box, and the list box is going to display the item that's inside numbers. So before we go to Visual Studio, let me show you right here how the logic of a for loop. Look at the for each loop, you could see that it starts right here, and it's going to go ahead and check for elements in the collection. By elements in the collection, I'm talking about elements inside our array, which is the array numbers right here. Does it have elements? If that's true, it's going to run the statement right here, and it's going to go ahead and it's going to go and check again if there are still elements that I haven't gone through inside this array of numbers. So what it does, it's going to go and check if there's the element 1, and it's going to go check for the element 2, check for the element 3, 4, up until it gets to 7. So this for each loop is going to run 7 times depending on how long my numbers array is. So what it does, it's going to run the length of the numbers array. So now if there are no longer elements inside my numbers array, it's gonna go and say, well, I went through all the elements, so I'm going to stop my loop now. So if it gets to 7, that means it's going to end the whole loop because it went through all the elements. So it keeps in mind all the elements that are inside the for each loop. So let's go ahead to Visual Studio and show you how this works. Now right here in Visual Studio, I'm going to write my basic for each loop, and this is what the for each loop looks like. I'm going to set the variable right here to an integer, and we do not have a collection. So our collection is either an array or a list of items. I'm going to call it numbers, and I'm going to have the numbers 1 up to 7. There we go. So our collection right here is going to be numbers, and I'm going to select my button just to display the results. I display it on the text of the button, and I want to display X. So what X is going to display is going to display all the items that are inside our numbers array. When I click on the button, you could see it went through all the numbers, but it did that so fast we couldn't see. I'm just going to slow down my threads right here so that you could see counting, going through all the numbers one by one. Now you could see it counting, so it basically going through all the items that are inside my array. So let's say I increase the number of items inside my array. So what the for each loop is going to do is going to keep into account the length of my numbers array. Is going to go through all the numbers that are inside my array. Now the last loop we're going to look at, it's the DoWhile loop. So this is basically a while loop that does something first and then it checks for the conditional expression last. If we look at it right here on our right hand side, you could see that our DoWhile loop starts with the task and then it does the condition after. So it's going to run the code first and then after that it's going to check for the condition. Now right here in Visual Studio, I'm going to begin by writing my DoWhile loop. So we're going to have something happening here. That is going to display the text on my button, and we want to display a count variable. Let's set that to 0, make it an integer. So what we're going to do is to count first, then after we're going to display, we're going to count first and then we're going to check our condition after. That's what I meant to say. So we're going to check if count is less than 10. I'm going to begin this. I'll press my button. You could see it does the same thing as the while loop. Only difference is that it's going to run the statement first and then it's going to check for the condition last. So another thing that I shouldn't leave out with regards to loops is that sometimes you have an if statement inside your loop, and in that if statement you want to check a certain condition. For example, we want to see if count is greater than 5. So when count is greater than 5, let's say we want to display a message or do something, and at the end of that you want to end the while loop. So what you want to do right now is to put what we call a break. What a break does is whenever this if statement is true, we are going to break outside the while loop. So our code is going to end for the loop and we're going to go outside right here where the loop is no longer running. So for example, when count is greater than 5, let's say we want to display a message box. And we want to display the word hello whenever our variable count is greater than 5, and we want to end the loop. We no longer want to begin counting because we just want to end it. So I'm gonna press my start and I'm gonna click on my button and it says hello whenever it gets to 6, because it's going to go outside my while loop and we no longer want to begin the loop again from the start.